Hello everyone, my name is Griffin and Hansen, and welcome to the third episode of AEA Talks. This is a new series that I'm doing as part of my organization, the Animation Education Association, where we speak to filmmakers who have made a great impact on animation history about their life and their careers, and we of course put them on YouTube for educational or entertainment purposes. Today we're going to talk to someone who's a little different than our previous guest. This isn't an animated filmmaker who's made an impact on animation history, but rather a historian who has invented animation history. For my money, Jerry Beck is the most important figure in the discipline of animation history. I believe that he even created the field with his book of Mice and Magic. Mr. Beck's books have been a constant source of inspiration and enjoyment for me and academics all across the globe, and have ignited a passion for animation history in the hearts of so many. He's also, of course, the man behind websites like Cartoon Research, the co-founder of Cartoon Brew, the former president of Streamline Pictures, and all around an invaluable part of keeping animation heritage alive in the United States. I was incredibly honored to have the opportunity to speak with him, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Well, I'm actually going to take it to your neck of the woods then, because recently I was in Flushing, and I went to Corona Park and to see the Unisphere and all that, and
I know the Hall of Science.
It wasn't open at the time, but I did walk by it, and those big tall towers with the discs on top.
The New York State Pavilion.
It's not bad.
And that's that neighborhood. That was my playground when I was a kid and a teenager.
Well, that's just the thing, is you growing up when you did was that era of the World's Fair. I mean, did you even go?
Yeah, I was 9 in 1964 and 10 in 1965. We lived walking distance from the fair. I had the thing that everybody dreams of having once in their childhood, at least, which is my parents. One day, and when I was 9, basically said, we're not going, it was a weekday, we had to go to school. They were like, we're not going to school today, we're going to the fair. And the whole family went to the fair that day. I have a photo of me with the Unisphere behind me. Mm-hmm. And I went several times, and I especially remember particular things, like the Ford, what was it called, a Magic Highway.
Right.
It was the Ford Pavilion, and it was a Disney attraction, which was never reprinted everywhere. It was never redone anywhere else. The Carousel of Progress, mm-hmm. It's a Small World, and others were done for the fair and then transplanted to Disneyland and Disney World. But this one, you can find a lot about it online. The soundtrack exists. But I have vivid memories of it because you got into a new Ford car, and it drove you into the past, which were, dinosaurs and cavemen.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. As a 9-year-old, it was like, what? Where am I? I believed in it. And then it went into the future, which really was crazy because they had to imagine a crazy future. And there's pictures of it all. It was pretty fantastic from my point of view. It was miraculous. It's weird because I lived there, and even as a kid, I was like, gee, I wish I lived in California where there's Disneyland. I mean, it was an impossible dream, the idea of even going to that.
Yeah.
We never went anywhere. But amazingly, we had the World's Fair in our backyard. So I realized later that I was more lucky than I realized at the time. I always felt disadvantaged, because I was in New York or I was in Queens. But I did realize early on when I looked at the comic books, and it would tell you that they were made in New York City, and mm-hmm. Marvel was, on Madison Avenue and that kind of thing. I was like, well, wow, the comics are done here. That's cool. I wouldn't want to be in Iowa. But I want to be here where all this is happening.
As somebody from New Hampshire, I somewhat know what you mean to be in a very remote place.
I mean, where I grew up, and I have to admit it is, and certainly in retrospect, when you get older, you start realizing what happened and how did it happen. But, that was where the comics were being made, and that's where the Comic-Cons started, mm-hmm. and the idea of a Comic-Con, and that's where I was able to go to those. And in the first couple of years, which I went to when I was 13, 14, 15, I was aware that these were not happening around the country. I mean, by 1970, there was San Diego had started. There was one in Detroit I knew of, but it was really very few and far between, that sort of thing, that culture, and I went to one of those the first time. I was 13. I was like, I found my people. This is this is my people. This is what this is what I lived for all year long. When I was being tortured in school, in high school or junior high, I knew that from '69 that Comic-Con exists. My whole life was about staying alive
to go to the next one. Yeah.
Early the next year and the next year, it's like I knew that universe. It's like a science fiction thing. Was that there was a universe that existed, a pocket universe of the people and the things that you cared about, and it wasn't in the real world. It wasn't. The real world goes on, and there was this little secret universe who, throughout the year, would read Famous Monsters, read Marvel comics, and and other things, and that was It was like a secret world. I love it in retrospect. One of the reasons I got into animation, or not one of, but one of the fascinations I had early on was I found out at some point, probably in the mid '70s, that the Fleischer Studio, that the Popeyes, and of course the later, famous studio, Casper, Little Audrey, Baby Huey, that was all done in Manhattan. And I'm like,
right, yeah.
and I could really begin to more relate to it. And once I knew that was really like another pocket world. I then found out that commercials were still being made. Animation was still happening in New York. Commercials in particular. By 1976 or so, 75, 76, when I was, by 75, okay, I'm 20 at that point. But that's when Richard Williams' production of Raggedy Ann and Andy moved into New York. And that was a big deal for anybody who cared about animation at that time. Ralph Bakshi, Fritz the Cat, that was started in New York. So there was a lot of, that fascinated me. I've talked about it before, that a lot of these animators, Myron Waldman, who worked for Fleischer, who was really the key guy behind Casper in the 40s, great animator, got to meet him, great guy.
Yeah, I think he lived on Long Island.
Yeah, he lived on Long Island, visited his house. And I would think about how he had to take the train in, or then maybe he had to take the subway, and then he had to come up the same subway steps I'm coming up, and then it's blasting, 32 degrees, cold, and he's got to get over from 42nd Street to 45th, where the famous studios is, and then he goes up in an elevator, and the doors open, and there's pictures on the wall of their characters. Because I every time I interviewed an animator who worked there, I actually would ask them, describe coming in off the street and going up the elevator, and maybe, what did you see? I would always ask them, what did you see when you walked in? I wanted to know, because I wanted to live through them vicariously. And so they would talk a lot about this big, punch clock. That they had a giant punch clock of some sort. Everybody had to punch in. But it was a factory. But it was, it was a fascinating. I just found it great that, can you imagine being in New York? I was not, strangely enough, I'm not a fan. I like New York now, and I like it to visit. And I'm glad I came from there, and I'm glad I know it well. Yeah. But I when I got the opportunity to move later, when I was 31, I took it. And I prefer the non-city life to an extent. And the idea that those jobs I was going to and the work I was doing, and these guys did the same thing, took the same subway, and they got to draw all day. And they got to draw Baby Huey or Little Audrey. And I'm like, to me, those are so opposite of what New York City is about. New York is more like Fritz the Cat or even the Fleischers. But, that to me was like a dream. If I can't be in LA, that part of that dream is right here, and some people actually lived it. They lived that dream. That's why I admire the artists at Famous and Fleischer and Harry Tunes and all those people who did artwork. Anybody who was able to somehow do for a living what they wanted to do, even if it's drawing comics, which I would have loved to have done that. I really admire them, because to do it in New York City, to me, from my point of view, from my upbringing, I thought it was really difficult. My parents came from that, and grandparents came from the Depression era generation, where just having a job, was the goal. Being able to pay rent, being able to eat, being able to, having a roof over your head. Yeah. Those were the goals, not actually doing the fun thing you'd rather do. Work in movies, work in cartoons. Anyway, I'm going way too far on that, but I thank you for stirring that memory.
No, of course. As a matter of fact, it seems like a lot of people talk about, especially in animation, how their parents looked down on them, or how their family told them to get a real job or something like that. But the story goes that you were on the beach and your aunt is the one that told you to go to Comic-Con.
No, everything you just said was true in my family. My family, at least in retrospect, and I look back at things, they were pretty, we would maybe not use the word today liberal, but in the original classic sense of that word, in terms of, they were very free, open.
Right.
Even though but that came with just trying to survive. There was no time for strict rules, from their perspective. So I was able to futz around, collect comic books, and kind of do what I wanted. My mother worked because she had to, because my mother and father got divorced, and so she was a mother with kids who had to be the breadwinner, and there was a lot of freedom on that. On the other hand, she was kind of strict, and that's the whole story. It's not my aunt; it's my grandmother, my mother's.
Your grandmother, right?
We used to go to the beach. We used to go to the beach clubs, and I actually hated that. It was one of those things.
True of many comic book fans.
I would rather have stayed home and read my comics. But and then one day, I luckily through the internet, that somebody at some point clipped the story, found it in the Daily News, the actual story, the actual date. It was on a Saturday. It was the first Phil Suling comic art convention of '68. It was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I found out about it on a Saturday, and she's like, and still I remember reading it like religiously, and that the next day it was still open. How in the world did they let a 13-year-old I still remember I had something like $1.50, 62 or some oddball amount. That's all I had, and I got on the subway. I bought the token to come home, and I had a little bit of money. A little bit of money meaning probably less than $1 in my pocket. And I went to this thing, and of course I've never forgotten it. And the convention was held there in that hotel, the Statler Hilton, which was just torn down recently, Hotel Pennsylvania. I still remember it vividly because it was, you wouldn't know there was a Comic-Con in that hotel. And you go up to the 18th floor. I'd ask people, where's this thing? And I went up to the 18th floor, the top floor. And when the door opened, there weren't people in costumes. It was nobody, nothing actually. I had to walk through another glass door, and over there was a ballroom. Two ballrooms, that's all I can remember. One that had what we call the dealer's room with the comics. And that was not unlike what we still have today, people with the long boxes. It wasn't really, it was the beginning of all that. And then there was another ballroom that was set up as a panel room. And I actually spent the entire day there. I went to panels. I saw Neil Adams in person. I think I got some autographs I'm forgetting now. I bought fanzines, which I still have. And I subscribed to those fanzines. They were a lifeline for me for the rest of the year. The Comic Reader, in particular, Comics Reader, and Newfangles was the name of another one. These were like lifelines. These were newsletters that told me about fandom, or really it told me about the new comics that were going to be coming out and who's drawing them. And I mean, oh my God, it was just so great. And it went on from there for the next few years, and eventually, without getting into that whole story, I collected movie film because it was the only way you could see the old cartoons.
Yeah, precisely.
We didn't have video. We didn't have videotape. We didn't have any streaming channels. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have, we didn't have VHS. We didn't have, audio, videotape. It didn't happen yet. This is late 60s, early 70s. So
Right.
there was an underground for buying film, and I joined that, and got a 16 millimeter projector while I was in high school, and started collecting movies. And I still have my movies. I want to sell them soon. But and because of that, and because of my interest in cartoons, superheroes, at one point I volunteered to be the film guy. They had a film guy, but they stopped doing it. And I said, I have a projector, and I have the films that'd be perfect to run here. And they believed me, and I ended up doing it for Phil Suling and the Creation conventions from the mid to late 70s into the early 80s. And I did it all until I moved to LA, actually, which would have been in 84 or 86. 86, actually.
I wonder if you realize something that you just did, though completely unintentionally, which is
Right.
you talk about how when you were a kid, you're talking to Myron Waldman about what it was like to go to Famous and what was it like to walk through the doors. But you just did the same thing. Is it interesting to you that you, in many ways, have become, to a younger generation like myself, a person who is as admired as somebody like Myron Waldman was for someone in your generation?
I'm flattered with that comparison, and if so, happy to answer any question or talk about any other aspect of whatever I did. I'm glad. I can only say I wanted to be those people, and I always, at some point, probably in my later teens and early 20s, at some point I was so into the history of all this stuff that I began to think of myself as if I were in the past, and if I would talk to somebody like you in the future. So I started to collect things and observe, so that I would be able to tell some future person, if they were interested, what it was like. I mean, I went really, I did that all along, but particularly when jumping way ahead into my story, when I was involved, how do I say this? I wasn't really working for Spumco, the Ren and Stimpy.
You were in the same building, I know, with Streamline, yeah.
Lived in the same building, same offices, and I was there, and I was working on distributing Japanese animation. But the thing is, I would literally walk around, and yes, I'm one of those people who'd go into the garbage cans and they threw away these drawings, and and I kept saying, if I were me, and I were back in the 30s at Termite Terrace for Warner Brothers, what would I do? Well, here I am in a situation like that. Nobody cares about this stuff now, but I'm thinking, maybe they will in the future. I didn't know that Ren and Stimpy would be the sensation it was, but I did appreciate that it was unusual at the time, and I felt no matter what happened, people were going to refer to it in the future one way or another. So I saved stuff from all these places that I've been involved with for history, and that's what's happening now, luckily, with the anime stuff. That was not a big part of my life. That was like 5 years.
Yeah.
And
Streamline, you mean, right?
Yeah, it was 5 years, and it was really hard to do, but we did it, and I was doing other stuff to actually earn a living during that period, like writing other books.
Yeah.
So I did all sorts of work while I was doing Streamline. It wasn't just the one thing, and even then I sort of felt like I better remember this for the future. I think that what we did was important in the history, helped move along animation in general, if not anime in particular.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. You've spent a lot of your career talking about very important artists. I think we both have spent a lot of our career helping preserve the story of artists, but those artists' art is only important if it can be seen. And you deserve a lot of credit, in my opinion, for working on distribution. How do you view your influence in the modern animation industry? When you see people talk about films that influence them, when you hear people talk about things that really made an impact on them, do you take a lot of pride in the work that you did?
Well, if I had something to do with them seeing that work, I do, in a way. Like right now, this minute, I mean, I'm involved with MeTV Tunes.
Right.
I'm very proud of this because it's almost a fulfillment. I've been doing it all along. It's another fulfillment of a not only a bucket list dream I have of what I'd like to do, but to have a channel that has all of the classic Hollywood cartoons, except for Disney, but all the other studios. At the moment, we've got Terry Toons, we've got Famous, we have Fleischer, we have Walter Lantz, we have Warner Brothers, Hanna-Barbera, MGM, Tex Avery, UPA, Columbia, including the earlier ones that nobody knows anything about.
Right.
The Fox
and the Crow. Yeah, I got you.
And I just recently helped put together my good friend Steve Stanchfield with the films he distributes, the Van Buren cartoons,
with Thunderbeam.
Lots of oddities, all of that on a channel. I mean, it's so crazy. Who would do it? Would anybody do it? Why would anybody do it? But it's beautiful, I think, and I think it will influence. I realized this decades ago, that things that I saw as a 8-year-old, going to the World's Fair, things I saw, on TV. I saw the Fleischer cartoons when they were first telecast, and in my life it would have been the late 60s. I know they were telecast earlier, but I would have been aware of them in the early 60s, as I was Rocky and Bullwinkle and Underdog and the Hanna-Barbera TV cartoons. All that stuff was logged in the back of my brain, and then my life moved on, and I didn't need that information. Then later on, when I finally resaw a lot of these cartoons, I'm like, oh my God. Or when I started drawing, I said, I realized later I got that from that cartoon. I didn't realize it. So consciously, I did not realize it. So the idea of what you see early, no matter what it is, but cartoons that you see as a young person really can influence you and be used for the rest of your life. This is what I tell my students. You may not need to have seen this cartoon today, but someday you're going to work on a project. You're going to do this, you do that, and you're going to remember that, let's do something like They Didn't Steamboat Willie. Or you're going to get a reference on Family Guy because of a cartoon I'm showing you now. And so, whatever it is. And so I love the idea that there are young people, possibly, growing up, they're going to have the back of their brain memory of the original Tom and Jerry that Van Buren did, or just Tom and Jerry, or the early Porky Pig cartoons and Betty Boop. Some of this stuff in the last 40 years or more hasn't been seen on television. People weren't exposed to it, but now, thanks to this one channel, they have the opportunity to be exposed to it, and I think that's really where I'm sort of proud. That's what I've always tried to do. That's what the anime thing was about. That's what my books are about. Two things. One is to expose people to classic animation and show them what animation can be. And the other thing is to, I wanted to underline that animation isn't simply a kid's medium. Luckily for me, most of the animation, whether it's anime or the cartoons made before 1960 or even up to 1960, were not necessarily aimed at children. They were aimed at the entire movie-going audience. Or in the case of the late 50s, the Flintstones, in the early 60s, there were a lot of shows that were aimed at adults again. So, that's really what I was trying to do when I got into this in the 70s. In the 1970s, after high school, when I was 20 in 1975, so people could do the math to find out how old I am now.
25, right?
I was inside. But my thing was, at that point, cartoons were for, cartoons and comic books were considered for kids. Period. Mic drop.
Yeah.
The end. That was it. That was the thinking by everybody. The world in the United States. Maybe not in the world. Maybe not in Europe. Not in France. Not where they had Metal Hurlant and, the anime.
Yeah, Pomelo.
America, except for, obviously, Bakshi was breaking the mold. That proves the point. Because he was doing an adult cartoon, and people were shocked because cartoons aren't for adults. It's like everybody had collective amnesia that cartoons were actually made for everyone back in the old days. So before Disney, with Disney in particular, I was trying to carry on that piece of information for people. Not only is it made for everybody, but look how great it is.
Right.
That's what I was doing, because I had that experience, because I began kind of rewatching the cartoons unintentionally when I came home from school when I was in high school in the early 70s, and I would have Bugs Bunny on in the background while I was doing my homework, and began as a kid who loved to draw, wanted to be an artist. I began to notice how well drawn those were, how great they were, and how they move. How do you do that? I didn't understand. There were no books on or anything. Again, we had no websites. We had nothing how do you do animation? There was no anything back then. So on my own, I tried to figure it out. I tried to understand. I tried to understand the drawings, try to find out who the people are who did them. How many cartoons were there? What were all their names? What were the plots?
Yeah.
Who directed them? All these questions came into my head. There was literally nowhere to find out that information. So as far as I knew, nobody was working on any books or anything about it. So I just started doing it myself. I just wanted the information for me. Luckily, Leonard Maltin, had a class at the New School in New York City, and it was a small class. As I recall, there were less than 10 people in it.
And you were the ticket taker, I believe.
Well, that came actually after the first semester that I went to. I was just an attendee, and it was a real college course, and it cost me a fortune. It cost because I had to, whatever I had to do, I wanted to get into that class.
Yeah.
I wasn't even part of the New School, so it cost like $100 or $200, which back in those days, I guess today that would be like $500 to $700. I mean, I don't know what it would be today, but it was a lot of money, and I had to go in this class. I had to hear this class. I had to meet this guy because I already had his books, his earliest books, like the Disney films. And I went in there, and then he said next year, because the attendance was so low, they were going to do it a different way, where they were going to do it like it was a screening, like it was in a classroom that was set up amphitheater, and that worked, and the class was very successful because they only charged like $5 to get in, or maybe less. And I was a ticket taker. I made myself the ticket taker, and I got to meet everybody, which the class ultimately. I hope Leonard writes a book about it or something, because I'm no good at this, but almost everybody in that class seems to have gone on to bigger and better things. A lot of great artists, writers. At the time, they were nobody, or they were unknown. Yeah. But we throughout the years, a lot of famous people have come to Leonard, sometimes to me, going, saying that they took the class, or they were in the class. And like, wow, we did not know. We did not know. Ed Catmull is one of those who created Pixar. And
Dr. Ed Catmull.
Yeah. And many, many others. My friend Drew Friedman was in the class. A lot of people were in there. I didn't know them then, but we met a lot of people there. This was definitely the place to be if you were into classic animation. Yeah. Because, again, they weren't having big screenings all around town. Or anything like that. This was like the fan club right here.
My next question is about Mr. Maltin. So Leonard Maltin, before he was strangled by the gremlins, is a big influence on your life. And you've talked before about how he's very important to you. He's a mentor, so on and so forth. He's only 5 years older than you. What is it like? And this is my question. What is it like to look up to someone who is so similar in age to you?
Well, I don't think I knew that then, or for many years. Leonard, even when he was, I guess, if I were 20, he was 25 or something when we met, maybe. I actually have a book on my shelf. I brought with me the great movie shorts and the Disney films of the first day of the class, and I had him autograph them. And he dated them, so I know which exact day that I met him.
Really?
I think it was in 74. But, and the thing is, I think other people will attest to this. Leonard had a maturity that we young hippies at that time did not have. He always had his hair cropped. He had a beard. He had a look and an air about him that you felt like he was a lot older, actually. I probably thought he was 10 years older. That was just the way it was. He had Whereas if you see pictures of me from that period, I have really long hair. I'm a real, it's 75. The early 70s is like the end of the 60s. It's pretty crazy.
And since this is an audio podcast, let me tell the audience at home that he still does have very long hair. And Jerry still has very long hair, and he's got a tie-dyed shirt on right now, and he's talking to me from the back of his van.
Yeah, you're right. I'm groovy, man. And I probably would look that way, but anyway, with age, your hair falls out. Leonard was a mentor because he was already doing. If you read Leonard's stories, he started like, you tell me how old he was, like a kid.
Mm-hmm.
When he started doing what he was doing, writing, doing a fanzine while he was a teenager. His movie guide, the 1969, his movie guide came out. He's like 18. He was doing everything. I'm like 10 years or so behind him in things that I would do. Mm-hmm. And that he did. He was already very knowledgeable of the world, so to speak. When I met him, he knew how to do this. I mean, I asked him right away, early on, because I wanted immediately to know about all the cartoons. And I said, how did you do the filmographies in his book, The Great Movie Shorts, where he has all the Our Gangs, all the Laurel and Hardys, all the Three Stooges. I said, I want a list like that of the cartoons. And nobody had done that. And there was no place to go to even see it. And he told me, he said, well, you go to the library at Lincoln Center. There's a special library there. It's an entertainment library. In LA, there's an equivalent library, the Margaret Herrick Library, which is the library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, open to the public. These are just libraries that have nothing but books and information and archives on show business, movies, TV, history, and they're great resources. And go out and get some of the trade magazines from the whatever period you want, the 30s or 40s, and most of them have on the back what the latest films are that are available to the theater owners. And so that was one way. So you had to go through every issue in order to actually do that, and I did. I transcribed all of these lists for all these studios, for months. I would go up to the library. Amazingly, like fate now. Everything's fate now to me. I had a job. I wasn't in the business yet. I had a day job that was actually a night job. I had a job where I worked from like 6 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, something like that. This was down in Wall Street. It's a what I call clerk jobs. Yeah. But I was free. I was free from 1 o'clock, so I would go up, take the subway up to the Lincoln Center Library and work all day. And on a couple of days of the week, they were open till 8 at night. And you could tell already, I had no social life. I was like, I just went up there and transcribed all of these cartoon things with the release dates and any other information. And on and on and on. That became the basis for the filmography in Of Mice and Magic. It also became such a list of a filmography like that is also the roadmap for a studio's history. Because without it, with it you can ask questions. You can see what they did this year versus that year. Everything grew. And it was a year or two into it that I was like, you did a book on Disney. It's fantastic. You did the Great Movie Shorts. I go, you're teaching about the history of animation. To Leonard does. I said, all right, why don't you do a book on the history of animation? And he was hesitant because it was in the air that our colleague Mike Barrier, who's still alive,
of course,
who had done this great fanzine called Funny World. Really, 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 really great fanzine. It was pretty much a professional magazine.
Yeah, John Canemaker has some great interviews in there.
Yeah, and he was doing something nobody else was doing, and it was way ahead of its time in a way. And he had said early on that he was collecting all these interviews and stuff. This is back in the 70s for a book, for a mammoth book on the history of Hollywood animation. And we waited and waited, and that book finally came out 25 years later. But back in the 70s, Leonard just thinking about it a lot. This happened to me twice with other people, where I felt like I gave them the germ of the idea, and then they thought about it, and they both came back and said, I think I'll do it. And that's what happened. Leonard was like, you know what? He's going to do his version. We don't know when it'll ever come out. Mm-hmm. I think I can do what I call my version, and I think it'll be good for the class, and it'll be a textbook and stuff. And he made it. He made the, he was able to make the arrangement or sell the idea, and basically signed me up, to assist, and also use my filmographies, which were really useful. And remember, Leonard was. In 75, Leslie Cabarga had published the Fleischer story. Joe Adamson did the Tex Avery King of Cartoons. Yep. And Leonard was the editor of that book. That's the whole story there. And but there really wasn't much else. It was The Art of Disney, the big Christopher Finch book. That was a big deal at the time. And it still is a big deal, but it was a big deal at the time. But nobody was really doing anything on any of the other animation, the animators. And I guess we saw that this sort of thing was needed. And, it was important. And we were just doing it, and we didn't know who was going to buy it, or who was going to read it, or if anybody was interested. But I was personally, I'm so happy. I was so happy that we were doing it, that this existed, that what we were doing was a thing that needed to be, and that's always what I work on. I have done books for hire. I've been hired by companies to work on a book project, but most of the books I want to do are ones I want to do, and nobody else is doing them. I actually have 3 or 4 ideas right now in the last few years that I really want to do. So we'll see if I actually live long enough to do them. I just want to work, and throughout, since that time, the minute when Mice and Magic was finished and came out, it was published, there was a feeling of, we did it. Mm-hmm. Here it is. History of animation. All the information you need is right in this book. But literally from that day forward till today, wherever you are listening to this today, there's always some new thing. Has always popped up. New information, more pieces of the puzzle. It's never ended. We've always got more information, films that were lost that have come up out of the woodwork. It has been my life. The history of animation is always something new to learn. There's always some new aspects, and it feeds into what's going on today. As I tell my students, I love the movie Back to the Future. I love the title. I think that is a part of my philosophy. Meaning, if you really want to make the future, you got to go back in time and study what happened first. Mm-hmm. Check it out. Be influenced by it or not. But see what someone else did, and then go from there. Take it and move on. The best stuff in recent years, not all of there's 2 kinds of films to me. It's either a completely original in its technique or its storytelling. I'm talking about animation.
Right.
Or it's, I don't want to say derivative, no, but it's a takeoff, or it's an expansion of something that already was. Okay, I'll give you 2 examples.
Please.
Best examples. But let's take the famous Spumco and Ren and Stimpy.
Sure.
Everybody knows. You look at that, and if you know anything about animation, I know from the creators that it was meant to be sort of a combination of the creators' Bob Clampett influence and the creators' love of the Hanna-Barbera TV cartoons of the late 50s and early 60s that he grew up with. Mush them together, and you've got Ren and Stimpy. Oh, and add a dollop of 90s, more freedom of, being able to use, images you might not have been able to use back in 1960. You know what I mean? Or language even, It's mixed in with,
that
the
hipness.
modern and the old. And as far as something original, as a quickie, I'll say the first of the Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse movies. Mm-hmm. Now, I love Spider-Man. Is obviously a comic book, and it exists, pre-existed. But the movie they made, and the way they made it, is like, okay, I never saw anything like this. I'm really into this. I'm into Spider-Man. I'm into adventure cartoons. I'm into Johnny Quest, the Superman cartoons. But this was nothing like any of those. This was a whole new animal. And I'm into that myself. I'm into progression. But, I love Gendy and what he does, Gendy Tartakovsky.
Right.
But his style, his Samurai Jack Star Wars style that he has, and he's admitted it. He takes it from a great Japanese anime feature called Little Prince and the Eight-Headed Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I don't know the name of the director or designer, but he was very influenced by that film. And I show that to people now, and I say, think of that. Imagine a Gendy doing this. They're like, oh, they can see it. It looks like Gendy's work,
mm-hmm.
but it's in a 1963 anime feature. So it's, that's what's great about, Back to the Future. There's some great stuff in the history of animation that doesn't need to be ignored or forgotten. Take it, use it, make it go forward. That's what I try to inspire in the students that I deal with. It's so much great stuff, and it's only really just beginning now, this century. When you look at the number of animated features that were made in the 20th century, it's very small.
Oh yeah.
And if we only had the outlets for animation that we had during that time. Today we have many, many more ways for people to distribute, many more ways for people to make animation.
Well, speaking of making animation, you have spent so much of your life writing about animation studios, the people who worked at them, people behind the scenes, and all these tremendous artists. But when it was your turn to step into the director's chair, what was it like? Because you were the creator of Karen and Kirby, and I know you also did Hornswiggle. So what was it like when you... did you feel like it prepared you? Did you feel like it was some of the stuff you'd studied? Or did it feel like a completely different ballpark?
Well, it's every answer you can think of. First of all, I don't think I directed any of them. Well, I did. I was very involved with both.
Mm-hmm.
They were both things I helped create. I had partners, at least with Karen and Kirby, a friend of mine named George Maestri, who's a great animator, who's a writer on Rocko's Modern Life, and he created the system of computer animation that is used on South Park. He actually worked on the first 6 episodes of South Park when they needed to figure out how are we going to do paper cutouts regularly, and George actually created the programming for that. And then when he left them, we hooked up and we figured out an idea for a show. I was working at Disney Television Animation at the time, and I was my job there at the time. This was a short-lived job. This was about a year. Was to sounds like a dream job for me, except nothing ever happened out of it. It was to really mine the library for things that might make good Saturday morning shows. That was the whole concept of the job I had. And so I started developing, a Merlin Jones cartoon show, or, a show called Mouseketeers that was mainly with funny animal characters. Mm-hmm. And I just came up with all these ideas that were kind of slightly, either they were based on old Disney or they were took from Disney history one way or another. Some of them were modern updates or cool versions of that idea. Some of them were faithful. They were done, as they were originally made. I think one of the original made ones was I was trying to do an Mr. Toad show.
Right.
It was going to look exactly like that. But almost all the other ones that I was involved with, including I had a great idea for a Mars and Beyond show. And Tron. We were trying. This is when nobody at Disney was doing any of this stuff. I was the only guy in a little room trying to figure out and hiring artists to come up with pitches for these characters. And I think we did a redo on the Mouseketeer idea because South Park had just gone on. And it was so popular immediately. And I knew the guy who did the look, the look of it, in terms of, he may not have designed the characters, but he had
the Maya software,
Yeah, the computer. So I said, just literally said to him over the phone, I said, how fast can you do some of that animation? I can do it pretty fast. I go, is there any way you can do like a little test film with just the characters moving a little bit, just to show us that you can do that? And, it's two deranged looking kids, and they're wearing Mickey Mouse hats. And we'll call them based on the Mickey Mouse Club of the 50s. You may not know this, but the two littlest kids were Karen and Cubby, were the two
Karen and Cubby, all right.
kids. We called them Karen and Cubby. And he did this little bit of animation. It blew my mind. In fact, he did it like that day. He came by at 5 o'clock at the end of the day and gave me a VHS tape, and I put it in, and it was the two characters just kind of moving in a very psychotic, South Park way. And I said, oh my God. When I looked, I was like, wow. I was amazed. I was also like, this looks like a show we could do. And for real, the reason I thought we could do it was that the guy who was in charge of my development department, every Monday when he came in, we'd have a meeting, and he'd come in, and whatever was happening that weekend, he would say, I got my third, fourth week, I figured him out. But he would say, like let's say if Titanic opened, he would say, can we do an animated Titanic? It'd be whatever the biggest movie was, or something in the air that was a fad that was happening that weekend. So the weekend before this, South Park had gone on, and he said something, is there any way that there'd be a Disney South Park? That was like his beginning sentence. Well, I knew the guy who did the animation for South Park, and that's when we figured this out. And we came up with a show around these two psychotic-looking characters. And then they were more psychotic than the final Karen and Kirby. After a few months of getting nowhere and selling any of my ideas, it was pretty crazy. It's really frustrating to be in what they call development at a studio. You come up with stuff, you work with really talented people, and then 9 times out of 10, it doesn't happen. And you've done all this work, and for naught. It was very frustrating. I hated it. And I said I'd rather be on the outside pitching something that I believe in. And so I left, and I went back to George, and I said, let's pitch this, because it was still fresh that year. I said, let's pitch it at other places. Let's just do it. And we came up with a pitch, and we went around, and we actually got Fox and Warner Brothers were both interested in it, And wow, we actually had a competition. We got an agent. We got, and we got a good deal at Warner Brothers. We ended up with Warner Brothers, and then we developed the classic line you've heard, development hell. We were in development hell for a year, which means you're working on the wishes of the studio of what the show could be. We're showing you what the show could be, but they want this or they want that. They want to tweak it. For me, it was like an education. I don't remember exactly what I was doing that year, but I was writing books all through the 90s, and into the 2000s. And so I was doing other stuff while I was doing other stuff. So, and when one of them comes true, then you do that, I still remember that again, I have long stories on all my career.
Go nuts, all day. I'm here all day.
But we're in the middle of it here, but the thing is, for like a year, we were in development hell. I guess that would have to have been 98 to 99. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because it went from 99 to 2000.
Yeah, that's when it was on. Yeah, but it was, I was at Disney in 97 through 98, middle of 98. And then 98 through, so we would have sold it in 98. That makes sense. And then, that's when we would have been in development hell, from 98 to 99.
Right.
And then somewhere around April, May, even June, late into the next year, they called us in, which was rare, and they basically said, is there any way that you can do these characters? We just want them to be the hosts of this show. It's the one, I forgot the title of it because it's a crazy title. It's the Big Cartoony Show. It's got the short name for it. And basically they would be hosts with several wraparound sequences that would lead into Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, that Pinky and the Brain.
Yeah.
But mainly, and they would just be the interstitials in between. And that would be like a little bit of new something for the show. And it was like, the first one, of course, had to be on in September. And it was like, I want to say June, July, August. It was like insane. And so for the next few months, we worked at Warner Brothers every day on making these 13 or so interstitial sequences that would go, when I say 13, I mean 13 episodes, 4 interstitial sequences in each episode. And it was, that's what we did. And I still remember that when we got the green light, I guess, to do that, I'd been pitching ideas to Cartoon Network on specials, Toon Hits special. And, the idea was we did one on the wartime cartoons. We did one on Bugs Bunny cartoons that are censored.
Yeah, there's one on Bosco and Honey, I think. Yeah,
I did a famous one called the worst cartoons ever. Yeah. We did all sorts of
Sam Singers.
Yeah, and so right. So anyway, I'd gotten a green light to do some of those at the same exact time. We got the green light to do the Warner Brothers thing. Well, it worked out because I was able to hire a guy. I had a script. I hired somebody. I let them put it together while I was working during the day on Karen and Kirby at Warner Brothers. But anyway, it was all, to me, educational. I had always wanted to be an animator, work in the studio, draw, this, that, whatever. But at that point in time in my life, I looked at it more like I'm going through this so that I can learn more about how a show like this gets made, And we did everything. We did the voices, we did everything that you have to do on those interstitials. I mean, George and I were pretty much the staff on that show, and then that happened. It came on, and by the spring that was over, and other opportunities came up that I'll save for another time.
Okay, we'll save Hornswiggle for the next talk.
That's another story.
We'll save it for next time. You are an expert in film distribution, but you were distributing films in the 1980s and the 1990s. How do you see animation distribution different today because of the internet? Shows like The Amazing Digital Circus, Has Been Hotel, these are shows that started on YouTube pages and are now on Netflix and Amazon and YouTube. How do you feel that it's changed the game, and how do you as a historian view it?
Well, as a whatever I am, I'm delighted by it. I mean, more animators, more ways to see them. This is good. It was very restrictive back in the day, where it's expensive to make films. If getting them distributed was difficult. Everything was hard. And today it's a little, I think, easier, Seems that way to me. There's more opportunities for people to do it and to get it seen. It wasn't like that back then.
How do you view it as a historian? Is there anything that you can even compare it to?
No. We're living in a different world now in every way. And particularly with film, it's right this second. Things are changing, as you know. As Warner Brothers is going to be bought by Netflix, maybe as film distribution is in big trouble right now. People are staying home and not going to the movies. It has to be either an animated film, asterisk. It has to be a big animated film like Zootopia. It has to be a superhero film, like the upcoming Avengers movie, I guess.
Right.
It has to be a horror film, like Sinners or,
The Weapons or something. Yeah.
Saw, whatever the latest horror things are.
Right.
Those are the things that are making money. And those are the events that people are going out and want to go on a Saturday night with a crowd to see. As the industry says out loud, that, the middle ground dramas, the romantic comedies, none of that's in movies anymore. It's on TV. It's on streaming or wherever. Things are changing now in a way that we are definitely going through a major change now. I mean, people forget that cinema, the way it was, is only about 100, 125, 130 years old. That's it. In the entirety of the human race, movies, the way we know, going to the movies, it may seem like our entire lifetime, but it's not. It's only a piece of the time that we've been here. And for it to evolve and be another way, I actually look forward to seeing where this is going. As much as I love going to the movies and seeing Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse on a big screen, or Akira, or Avatar, it's definitely going to be different. It might be better ultimately. I've never been people ever since the mid-'70s with Jaws and Star Wars, and there was always articles in the paper about it's going to be event cinema. Movies are just going to be big events like roller coaster rides.
Right.
That never really happened, really, but it is sort of getting there now. It seems to me. IMAX and all these other special ways that you can go see a movie that's, it's more like a theme park ride to go to the kind of movies like Avatar, than it used to be. Maybe that's where movies are going. Movies, in the beginning of sound, at least, were really like a variant of stage plays or stage musicals. They were a variant. They weren't the same, but they were. And going to the movies, old timers will tell you, "Oh, we used to get dressed up to go to the movie."
Yeah,
that would be my mother and father. That would be way before your age. But people used to get dressed up to go out to the theater, and the way they presented movies back then, it was more theatrical. The posters, the lobby cards, the trailers,
the newsreels,
the short subject.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was a different way of going. We don't live in that world anymore. So the marquees, the theaters, the way they built them. It's a different experience. We're so far gone from the version of movies that I grew up with that I actually embrace a fun, different future. I don't mind that. I don't fear it. I was listening to the radio just today, and there was some, expert on talking about how that if, Comcast or Netflix buys Warner Brothers, either are going to ruin movies because we'll have less movies. They're going to fire a lot of people. They want a shorter window. I think we're already living in that world. A movie comes out and 3 weeks later it's on streaming.
Yep.
I mean, that's where the future is of this. They don't want to. This movie studios are a business, and they love the idea of spending a lot of money to advertise a movie, and if it's a bomb, it isn't a waste because that movie's going to be on the streaming service, and they're amortizing their advertising dollars. There's so many ways to look at it. Animation, though, will always be, in my opinion. There's no way around it. It's a folk art. It's a handcrafted folk art. Of course, I prefer literally the handcrafted ones, the hand drawn. But it's another way of telling stories that give you a different visual. It's the same as different authors writing a book. It's the same as different. Think of children's books. You got Dr. Seuss. You got William Joyce. You got different artists and who tell you their stories from their vision. That's what animation is. It's a medium, and it can be told. The stories can be told by different artists. Some will be more popular than others, and there's so much more that animation can do that it still hasn't done.
I want to go back to New York for just one question. You mentioned Ralph Bakshi a few times in your talk today, and Ralph Bakshi is 17 years older than you are. I know that he grew up in a different area of New York than you did, but when you talk about a lot of these artists who were making fantastical films that you couldn't believe were also made by people who lived in New York, it seems like they were sort of escapism. Ralph Bakshi's city films like Coonskin and Heavy Traffic and stuff are definitely a bit more urban than, escapism. Do you watch those films and see anything that reminds you of your childhood or your time in New York?
Yes and no. New York was a really tough place in the late 60s and the 70s in general, and even most of the 80s. It changed. It changed It changed a lot after I left in 1986, and it's a better place now. But if you've ever seen Midnight Cowboy or Mean Streets,
Right.
that's New York. That was New York then. It was really tough. I mean, I'm amazed I wasn't mugged and killed and all that.
God. Me too. I'm glad you aren't.
Yeah, but I mean, it was really, people were scared. It was really a paranoid place to be. As I said, I used to take the subway when I was 13, 14, 15. I'd hang out in Times Square. I saw all that stuff. And, it was, when I did it, it was the late 60s, early 70s, and there were hippies, and there were all those things you read about the hippies, the Lovin' in Central Park or this or that. Things like that were going on, and I got to at least, walk by it and watch. But I love that period.
The last thing I wanted to ask this evening, we've talked a lot about history, and you have so many credits to your name. You have so much notoriety as one of the most respected people in all of the discipline of animation history. You're incredibly well known for your work in film distribution, and you, in my opinion, are one of the most respected people in the animation industry. At least someone like myself is very humbled to have the opportunity to talk to you. But this is all success that has come throughout your entire life. This is something that you've worked at and worked at and worked at. As a historian, is there anybody, whether you knew them personally or never met them at all, that you wish could see your success?
Well, first of all, as late as the Streamline period, even later, I always felt I was alone doing this. I did that, my book, my Looney Tunes guide, the updated version, and came out in 1989. I remember when I was working on this, I was in Hollywood at that point. I was, in a studio apartment. I don't think I had a girlfriend then. Yeah, I didn't. And I was just working on this book, like I would say 24 hours a day, but clearly, less than that. But, I was constant. I woke up, did the book, and then went to bed and did the book. And it was constant. But I remember when I was doing that I felt like I was on a little path to create an analogy, but I actually thought of this back then. I felt like I was on my own little path alone. And someday people were going to be following me on this path. But I'm on it alone. I'm the one guy doing this. Yes, I had friends like Leonard Maltin, Leslie Cabarga. I had other friends who were doing a variant of what I was doing. But it was nobody was recognizing what you're saying about me now. I'm happy to get all this adulation now. I am happy about that. But I never had it, so I never expected it. I was just doing this stuff because I wanted to see it myself. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody? Because even my parents, who are not with us anymore, they never really understood any of this. To them, it was like, you're just fooling around. It's like playing with trains or something. It was like, he's over there playing with trains. It didn't mean anything to them. They weren't into this. I guess once in a while, I got no answer, no real good answer for you. Once in a while, I think of some friends of mine who passed away, and I said, oh, they would have loved this, or they would be so happy to see this happen, that kind of thing. But, who would you think might be a person who would...
Well, I don't know your personal life, but I don't know, maybe I guess your parents or your siblings or maybe even your grandma, who was the first person to even tell you to go to Comic-Con.
Yeah. Well, she was the classic grandma who was supported you, who was with you right down the line, She was great. And so, she would have been proud, yeah. But I think she had that classic parent thing where she knows, she kind of knows I was going to do something great. Do something good. I really confounded. I had an aunt who's now passed away too, and she was the closest thing to in our family of somebody who was into the arts, somebody who understood. She was into Broadway plays and arts in New York in general. And when I was a little kid, she just thought I was a pesky little kid. It was just in the way. But later on before she passed away in the last 10, 15 years, she saw that, she saw I wrote books. She saw I was on TCM at one point. She like, oh, you're really doing, she really came around and felt like, wow, I really, really respected that. And that was the closest to that sort of thing. And the person was there to see it and hear it. So, I don't really have like I wish Tex Avery could have seen what I just did. But
with one eye, of course.
I'm still in touch with Chuck Jones's family, Bob Clampett's family, Friz Freeling's family, and others. So, they all know that I'm trying to champion what they have done, or what the main person has done. So, that's why I'm in good with all these people.
There you go.
I'm just trying to help. They understand that it's lonely. There's really, in their lifetime, no one really paid. Hey, my dad directed these cartoons. That means something to us, but it didn't mean anything to their friends at the when they were kids. I asked them all the time, what was it like that your dad directed Bugs Bunny? Didn't everybody love those cartoons? Yeah, they did, but they didn't even believe it. I remember one of them saying, Fred who said they didn't even believe me. They didn't believe, even if his name was on screen, they were like, I was making it up. Like, oh, it's the same name. And you think, that's the kind of respect that the people who made the cartoons got and their family. They did it in darkness. Mm-hmm. Friz Freeling and Chuck Jones even. Chuck lived long enough to get this kind of adulation from fans, but they didn't see that in their general life. That was just a job. It was in a way a commercial art job.
Essentially.
Nobody said that, but it was just there were many artists doing all sorts of things. As we know, and these guys did animated cartoons.
If no one has given you the flowers in the same way that you helped give these people their flowers, current day animation historians or nerds, whatever we want to call ourselves, are greatly in debt to you. So thank you very much for everything that you've done to push the discipline.
Thank you. If you want to do another one and come up with a set of questions, happy to do it in another time.